Well, Shirley Enebrad, thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
Thanks for having me.
So, you have been going through just hell
Yeah.
over not just recently, but you've had a lot of things happening in your life. You actually, when the fires were hitting, you're in California, right?
I'm in California because my youngest daughter got leukemia. So I had to leave Maui to come and care for her. She's an adult, but there was months where she couldn't walk, so she couldn't care for herself. So we moved here to take care of her and had a friend, kind of like a Panay daughter, manage our house. And so we've had long-term renters in our house on Maui for the last 3 years.
And was your
Oh,
house
no.
in Lahaina?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Right in the
What
burn zone.
when you describe the daughter that is taking care of your home, that term you use, explain that.
Hanai in Hawaiian means adopted.
Okay. So it's
Yeah.
someone that you're close to, but you consider a daughter.
Yeah. She's my blonde daughter.
Okay.
That's Danielle. But she made it, everybody made it out of the house, but one of the tenants went back because she forgot her cell phone and she's in the unaccounted for.
Oh
And
my.
yeah, I'm sure she's gone.
But you also have an older daughter who
My
has
older daughter, Bri, lives there as well, and with my grandsons. And she is now homeless and jobless. And her house did not burn, but it is toxic from the smoke damage and all the chemicals and stuff that's there. She went in to see what she could salvage the other day, and everything smoke damaged. So anything except for hard surface items has to be thrown out. So she's doing that today. But the fire, when she first found out that her neighborhood was on fire, someone called her and woke her up and said, "Look, are you okay?" And she said, "What are you talking about?" Because she'd been asleep. And they said, "Look out your window." She looked out her window and there was fire on three sides. So she grabbed her inhaler and her EpiPen and jumped in her car and drove through the fire a little ways and out of her neighborhood. So it's amazing that her house didn't burn, but because all around it did.
So you were just on remote. I mean, you're in San Diego during all this, and I mean, there were times when you couldn't communicate. I mean, what was that like?
That was a nightmare. I couldn't get a hold of her. Well, it started off in the morning. Danielle called and said that she wanted to know how many solar panels we had on our house because um, the neighbors' solar panels and roof tiles were flying all over the neighborhood, and the roof flew off of our shed in the backyard. And I said, "Well, don't go outside." And then she called back and she said, "There's smoke. We're going to evacuate." I said, "Well, get the hell out of there." And so they started evacuating in three cars and they got like not even a mile away. And Jean said, "Oh, I forgot my phone." And the girl that was driving said, "Well, we're not going back. It's too dangerous. We're out of here." And she got angry and said, "Well, I just bought that phone." And Gio said, "You can buy another phone." And at that point, they weren't even sure if the fire was going to reach our neighborhood. So she got out of the car and stomped off to walk back towards Shark Pit and has never been seen since. And she
Uh,
would have called her daughter by now. Her daughter is 8.5 months pregnant and just sick with worry. We all kind of felt like from the beginning that she didn't make it because she would have called her daughter.
well, in talking to your daughters, I mean, that's the one thing that I haven't been able to get a handle on is how quickly the fire spread.
Oh my God, 17 minutes. They, the authorities say that it only took 17 minutes to wipe out Lahaina town.
wow.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. It was 80-mile-per-hour wind, see, and there was just blowing the fire everywhere. And gas stations were exploding. Most of the people, especially up Lahaina Luna, had propane, to cook with and stuff. So those tanks were exploding, and it just spread the fire. And then when the harbor caught fire, a lot of people had jumped in the ocean off the front street to try to get away from it. But when the boats started exploding, the diesel went into the water and it doesn't sink. So that was on fire. So it just kept spreading. And I mean, it was just, the whole thing's just horrific. I mean, my daughter has terrible PTSD, both of them. And I do grief work. So I'm getting ready to go over there to try to help people. I couldn't go, at first. My old clients were calling me and asking for help. And I said, I can't do it yet. I have PTSD myself. So I'm getting ready to go at the end of this month.
So leading up to this, were you and your daughters aware that the fires could possibly spread quickly and get to their homes?
Well, no. Well, Bri was, because it was already in her neighborhood. But like I said, Danielle and those guys and my renters left because of the smoke. And they just didn't think it was healthy to be breathing in smoke. They weren't really thinking that the fire would reach Shark Pit, because our neighborhood is like 3 blocks south of the banyan tree. And everything seemed to be burning up Lahaina Luna. So they just didn't think it was going to come that way. And it did. I mean, it went all the way past Puamana.
When did the fires start?
Well, that's the thing that people don't understand, is there was a fire up Lahaina Luna Road in the morning. The fire department went there and they thought they put it out. And then there was also a fire that had started the day before in Kula, which is upcountry, about an hour and a half away. And the fire trucks, I think all but 2, went to Kula to fight the fire there. So when it flared up again in Lahaina, there was no fire trucks. And then when they did have like 2 fire trucks, the fire hydrants were empty, because the guy in charge of the water, which is ridiculous, didn't turn it on. The guy that was supposed to turn off the power to the power lines because of the hurricane didn't turn them off. I mean, it was like the perfect storm of a bunch of people screwing up big time. And that the result is all of these dead people and people's lives affected for the rest of their lives. People don't recover from that. And, so many homeless and so many without jobs and looking towards the future is pretty bleak. So I was just talking to State Representative Ellie Cochran, and she's worried because people have turned to drink and drugs to try to escape the pain and the nightmares. And she said, we're on a tiny island. They didn't have enough therapists in the first place. So she said, we need mental health help. And I said, well, I have been organizing to try to get people to do virtual grief work. But it never occurred to me that we're going to need people to do virtual alcohol and drug interventions. But I don't know how people are going to receive that anyway, when everything looks pretty bleak.
Right.
So, yeah.
Especially when you have an economy that was really a service economy that relied on tourists so much, and it just
completely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the hurricane, talk about the mix with all of this, because I mean, like you said, a perfect storm.
Well, the strange thing is the hurricane was 500 miles south of the islands, but because there's nothing to stop the wind, it went right through to Maui. And usually when there's a hurricane, the path of it would come from the southeast, and it would hit the big island and get blown apart before it got to Maui. But just the way, again, the perfect storm, where it ended up between the islands, it aimed right for Maui. So, when you have 70-mile-an-hour sustained winds over a long period of time, and then 80-mile-an-hour gusts, trees started falling on power lines, and power lines started toppling. I mean, 30 power poles fell in Lahaina proper. And so that's why everybody was out, didn't have power. But then the guy that was supposed to turn it off, knowing they were going to have these big winds, I don't know what his problem was, but he didn't do it. And the guy that was supposed to turn on the water, didn't do it. And the guy, I know people were beating up the guy that usually sounds the tsunami
the sirens, yeah.
Yeah, but we didn't have one for fire. But when you think about it, we had a wildfire 5 years ago that was very scary, and they should have put something in place then. They should have known what the potential was then, because 5 houses burned in one valley, and then a couple houses on Lahaina Luna, because that whole hill that used to be pineapple and sugarcane is now grass, dried grass. So it's just waiting for fire. Anyway, I know heads are going to roll. And I know people right now are going after the mayor. The emergency guy resigned, and I'm pretty sure they're going to go after the police chief because the cops didn't know what they were doing. They were keeping people from escaping the fire, which makes no sense. So they weren't even aware of how fast it was going to happen. So, and they weren't trained properly, as far as I can tell. So I think it's like everybody's in trouble.
Yeah. Your daughters, where did they go to once to get away?
Where did the people?
Your daughters.
Oh,
Your
well, my
oldest daughter
daughter,
and then your adopted daughter.
well, our house was kind of on the south end of Lahaina. And so Danielle didn't have far to go to get away from it because she left when it was just smoke. When Bri went, she could hear the gas stations exploding and stuff and see debris in the air. She kind of went the opposite way that everybody else was trying to go. She had the sense to do that because she could see that cars were backing up and not moving. And she thought, well, what are they waiting for the lights? So she went the other way, and then she went into town before it hit the town. And she weaved her way around power poles that were down, sparking, and trees that were across the road. So it was a bit of a challenge, but luckily she used to drive Uber. So she knew all the back streets. And she didn't care if she was going one way, the wrong way. She just was getting the heck out of there. And then she stopped at our church, Wyola Church, 200-year-old fantastic Hawaiian church, and prayed. But she said she got out of the car to look because where it's situated, you could see the highway on this side, and on this side, you could see Front Street. So she determined which way the wind was blowing, and she looked at the traffic situation, and then she knew how to get out of there. So she actually stopped in our neighborhood to see if her friend was there because she knew he didn't have a car. And he was out fishing, so he wasn't home, but his nephew was there. So she rousted him, got him up and said, come on, you're coming with me. And he was confused because he'd just woken up. She grabbed him, and while he was getting dressed, she ran next door and woke up the neighbors because she knew that they worked in the restaurant business too. And so they worked at night. So she knew with their cars there that they were probably asleep. So she banged on the doors, got them up, and then she and Laka took off and weaved their way out of the neighborhood, the Shark Pit neighborhood, and got onto the lower road. And then it was like a back, I don't know, miles and miles of cars backed up. So a ride that would usually take 20 minutes took 3 hours to get to the other side, to get to Kihei. She was going to go to Kihei, but then they had a fire. So they were evacuating Kihei, and that road was closed. So then she drove to drop this boy off in Kahului, and she was trying to figure out where she was going to go because, if you live on the west side and you work on the west side, most of your friends are there. So she was trying to figure out who she knew that lived, away from the fires. So she ended up in the upcountry at a friend's house in Makawao. And then Danielle ended up at a friend's house on the other side of the island, and she is currently living in their shed.
Wow.
So
everybody does what they got to do.
The devastation, the property devastation is one thing, but the loss of lives, and no one will ever. I mean, eventually there'll be an estimate, right? But so many people were trapped in the fire. How are the people there dealing with that, not being able to ever know for certainty what happened?
Yeah, well, that's why people are drinking. The people that are still on the list, and they whittled the list supposedly down to 355 today, and they've just given up. They've stopped the search. So you just have to say those people died and add that to the 115. But I have a problem, and I think there's going to be issues when people stop being numb about how they counted people, because that 115 confirmed dead hasn't changed for a week and a half. And I know of a family that went and found the remains of their son, their teenage boy, and took him to the morgue, and they never added him to the list of confirmed. There's there's no way that the list of confirmed, because even on the list of unaccounted for, there's no children. And school was closed that day because of the winds. And so a lot of kids were home alone while their parents were at work. So I don't know if they're trying to whitewash it so that it doesn't sound as bad. They don't want to make people think about the babies. But I have eyewitness from several friends that saw children in car seats in burned out cars, and they're not being counted. So I don't know. I don't know what the deal is, and it's pretty disturbing to think, that they're doing that, because they only have one 7-year-old on the list, but there was whole families that died in those cars. There was people that claimed that they saw babies in mom's arms in the ocean and then turned around and no more baby.
Oh.
So, but they're not counting those, and I don't know if it's because they don't want to scare the tourists away or what. But somebody's got to answer for that, because it sounds completely inaccurate, and now there's a bunch of conspiracy theories going around which are completely nuts, which doesn't help anything. And those are all started by people that already have nothing to do with Maui. They're not there, and they're just making crap up so that they can turn it into a political football or whatever. But
Yeah.
I think the people.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think the people that lost people or that still have people on the list are always going to. I mean, I know that Jean's daughter knows in her heart that her mom didn't survive because her mom would have called. And but you still want to hang on to hope,
Mm-hmm.
And but pretty much Danielle and I have thought from the very beginning that she didn't make it because she was running towards the fire, not away. Yeah, all for a cell phone. So that's heartbreaking all by itself.
Well, and by now people would have connected, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
I mean, communication is much better now.
What's it like on the ground there? I mean, how many people were actually displaced? What are their living conditions?
Oh my God, thousands. Well, 2,200 structures supposedly burned, and most of those were residents. I have friends that are living in, there's like 5 families crammed into one house. My daughter was helping some people that evacuated to Hana. There's a guy in Hana that has 50 extra people living in his house. These are people he doesn't even know. They just take people in. And like where Danielle's living, I think there was at least 10 other adults at the house, and I don't know how many babies and how many dogs and cats. So she's probably going to move to Oahu, and my daughter's hopefully going to move to the Big Island because she has a job offer there. There's just not going to be jobs. They want to reopen the West Side. I heard yesterday that the resorts in Ka'anapali were housing their employees that were displaced. Well, now they're going to kick them all out. I don't know where they're going to go, but because they want to reopen the resorts by sometime in October. And they want to put up screens so that tourists can drive past the burn zone and to make it to Ka'anapali. I don't even know who would want to go, but
yeah,
people do.
There's been a bit of controversy over whether tourists should come to Maui now or just stay away. Some are saying come because we need your tourists dollars.
Yep.
Others are saying no, this is not a time to come here and visit.
Well, unfortunately, it's the people that that aren't from West Maui that are saying, well, our part of the island's fine. We need the money, our restaurants, our Airbnbs, whatever. But what people don't get is that a lot of the people that worked at the resorts in Wailea and Kihei lived on the West Side. Their cars burned. Nobody's going to hand them a car, So even if you go, the service is going to be slower because they're going to be short-staffed. So if people decide to go and they want to go to Wailea or Kihei or even on the Hana side, they just have to know that they need to be patient because there isn't enough employees that are able to get over there to do their jobs. didn't work on the west side. I mean, most of the resorts were on our side of the island, but there is quite a few, you know, in Kihei. So, you know, people insist on going. They just need to be kind and patient. The people that don't want them to go are the people that are grieving. And I was against them going at the beginning because it's like, just wait till we're ready, you know, wait till people have had time to find the dead bodies and bury them and, you know, grieve and then come. But nobody wants to be told what to do. Danielle, my Hanai daughter, was interviewed by a TV station in Oregon, and he or she posted it on Instagram. Anyway, people were just tearing her to shreds because they were saying, "How dare you tell us not to come there?" And, you know, white girl, you shouldn't even be there, blah, blah, blah. And they turned it into a racial thing and don't tell me what to do kind of thing. She was just saying, don't come right now. We can't entertain you. We can't take care of you. We have to take care of ourselves. We need those resources for us. And you know, I don't know who's to decide when but everybody's ready, because everybody is going to be grieving at a different pace.
I don't think anybody's going to be ready for years.
No, and it's going to be rough, you know.
Yeah.
The people that have relatives off island pretty much left or are leaving. The people that don't have anybody have to stay because that's where they're from. And but whole families were displaced. I used to work with a woman who I think her parents' house was like a compound. Like her brother and his family was in one house. The mom and dad, which are quite elderly, her dad's 100, and her older sister and her younger sister and her son all lived in the main house, and their house is gone. So, and then Janie's house burned. So they all moved in with the nephew, you know. So if you have that, but you know, that's not sustainable.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, none
like
of it's
that.
really sustainable. I mean, do the people there feel that the government response, both federal and state, has been sufficient?
Oh, of course not. No. Everybody, you know, especially when the shock wears off, everybody's getting angry. My daughter said yesterday, she said, "Mom," she said, "the tension is so terrible on the west side." She said, "I'm afraid people are going to start rioting." And that's another reason she doesn't want to stay on that side, you know, aside from the fact that her house is ruined. But she hadn't seen the decimation in person since she had fled. And she went 2 days ago and she called me up and she was a wreck. She just said it just triggered everything all over again.
Now, you brought that daughter to where you're staying in California for a little while, didn't you?
Yeah. I flew her and my grandson here, my younger grandson. My older grandson went to Seattle. And so they came and, you know, they were only going to stay a little while because they didn't know when they were going to figure out school. And then we got predicted to have a hurricane. And she said, "Mom, I can't go through another hurricane." So we flew them to Seattle. And then they were there for not quite a week. And now they're back on Maui. Mm-hmm. Trying to deal with stuff. So
was that just to give them a respite, help them just get away? Yeah.
Just to get away. And luckily my grandson, my 12-year-old grandson, wasn't home with her when it happened. So he didn't live through the terror of having to try to outrun fire, you know, and what she went through. So that was good. But you know, he's been hearing about it because everywhere she goes, people asking her about it. So he's starting to have nightmares, even though he wasn't there when it happened. And then I think he's also starting to be affected by the idea that they might have to move from Maui, which is where his dad lives. So, but you know, it's a short plane ride. So she's hoping that he'll cooperate and let her take Keone to the Big Island.
So the people that weren't able to find housing with friends or relatives or the largesse of other people, where are they staying? Are they in a compound, or is it, you know, is it like a camp? I mean, what are conditions for those people?
Well, they were all in high school gymnasiums. There was a huge portion of them at the War Memorial, which is you know, like the what's that Metro field on at the Seattle Center? You know, where they
Oh,
play
Memorial
football?
Stadium.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Memorial
Yeah.
Stadium. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like that. So they had beds and tents and stuff. But I think that they're trying to close down the shelters and trying to get people moved out. But I don't know where they're going. There was already a housing shortage on the island before this happened. I mean, we had 7 people living in our house. It was a 7-bedroom house, but we rented it out as long-term rentals for people because there was such a shortage. Where my daughter lived, there is 5 units in the house. You know, it was a converted house into 5 units. That's the kind of stuff that you saw on the west side. You don't see that on the other parts of the island. So there isn't multiple housing like that. So I don't know where these people are going, and I don't know how they're going to deal with it. But there's going to be, if they start kicking people out of the resorts that they've been housing, so they can reopen, where are these people going to go? And I think they're going to be angry, you know. So
Well, just getting the necessities, food and shelter and things. I mean, that's going to be difficult. I mean, how are they going to feed these people if they have no jobs? And I mean, is there
well,
a
everybody
plan?
was no, not a very good one. There, you know, people are applying for unemployment, but my daughter said you can't even get through, and you have to do it by phone because everybody's computer's burned up, kind of thing. But she just said, well, I'm not going to do it until later because you can backdate it, but it's still not enough for people, you know. And what's his name? Bezos donated $100 million.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where that's going to go. And then Oprah and The Rock are supposedly donating $1,200 a month for people, for adults that were displaced. And but that's like, do they not know how much rent is over there?
Yeah.
You
Well,
know,
and then just all these different entities coming in, you know, it's just rife for graft. I mean, people are
it
going to
is,
be,
and it's so disorganized. You know, it's like, who's in charge?
yeah.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
problem.
What
And I
about
think
the
that's
land? What about land developers? There's a deep concern that they would come in and
try
start
to
buying
buy
up.
it.
Right.
Well, you know, I've seen that on social media, and nobody's contacted us. A lawyer has offering to help us, but nobody's offered to buy our property. And the governor was going to try to make it so that they couldn't come in and do that. But it's going to take years before we can even rebuild our house. So, you know, we're going to be paying a mortgage payment for a pile of ash for like 3 or 4 or 5, maybe even 5 years. I hope it's not that long, but and that, you know, and then the insurance companies are trying to screw everybody, uh, like ours. So we're probably going to have to get a lawyer to deal with the insurance company. So it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare for everybody. I can see why they're drinking and drugging. You know, it's an escape from reality.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Do you want to rebuild?
oh yeah, yeah. Um, you know, we always intended to move back there at some point. We bought a house here too, but that was a fantastic uh, income. I mean, we were getting about 10 grand a month in rental income, and it covered that mortgage payment and most of the mortgage payment here. So um, we're out of that rental income because our insurance guy is now saying that we had the wrong kind of insurance. And I said, well, wait a minute, you were in charge of making sure that we had the right kind of insurance. So it sounds like this was your mistake and you need to fix it. So that's why I say we're going to probably have to get a lawyer to deal with this because, first of all, they're saying that we just had a regular homeowners plan, and that would provide for loss of use. But since we weren't living there, we're not entitled to that. And since we didn't have the renter's insurance, we don't get reimbursement for the loss of rental income. So it's catch-22. Like they're going to try to screw us both ways. So, and I'm sure we're not the only ones.
Yeah.
A lot of people didn't even have insurance because they didn't have mortgages because their houses were inherited or whatever. And so they're not going to have any money to rebuild because they had no insurance. It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare.
How are you doing? And your husband and your daughter
Well,
that's there in California who's dealing with her own issues.
well, we're all really sad. At first I was super sad because that was like my favorite house. I loved my house. And it was kind of two houses in one, but the upstairs part, which is where we lived, was windows everywhere. It was so full of light, and we had beautiful tropical plants outside everywhere. And it was half a block from the beach, you know. It was the perfect location, but because it was kind of a quiet little neighborhood beach called Shark Pit. So we always intended at some point to move back there, and now it's gone. So we would like to rebuild if we can get the insurance to cooperate. And but I don't know if I'll ever want to live there again because it's not the same. Lahaina will never be the same because all of the history and all of the sacred sites are burned. You can't replace those things. And it was such a cool little town. I mean, I loved Lahaina. And um, it just breaks my heart that it's gone. I'm praying that the banyan tree will survive because that would be the only thing that made it.
Yeah.
And it's in shock. Apparently, it's in a coma right now. So they're still trying to nurse it back to health. But I don't know. The tree wouldn't be enough to make me want to live there again.
So what's life like for the people that weren't directly in the burn zone? Because there's a lot of smaller neighborhoods around it that escaped the fire. I mean, they're in there suffering with everyone else because I'm sure infrastructure's gone, grocery stores, all that sort of thing are compromised.
Well, a few things are starting to open up again. For some reason, the Safeway didn't burn, and the McDonald's didn't burn right in downtown Lahaina. But the people whose neighborhoods, they've got survivor guild,
Mm-hmm.
and they're trying to help take in people. They didn't have any power for weeks either because all the power was eventually shut down. But one of my best friends, they were talking about one of the schools that burned that was right next to the harbor, Kamehameha III, burned to the ground. His kids went there. They were going to combine them with the kids at Princess, which is up the hill above the burn zone. But the air is toxic. There's asbestos floating in the air. And once they start bulldozing, trying to whatever they're going to do with all that debris, it's going to make the air even worse, like a million times worse. So he didn't want his kids to go there. So he sent his wife and his 3 little girls to Florida. My other friend, his family, his wife and his 2 little girls are moved to San Francisco to stay with relatives until they can figure out what's going to happen with their house. And then some other friends of ours happened to be on vacation when it happened and their house burned. So they're going to stay in Oxnard for the next year or till whenever they can figure out what happens with their house too. So people that can leave left. The people that can't are stuck and having to deal with it's almost like martial law, from my understanding is there's a curfew. Bryce said that the curfew is 10 o'clock. You can't be anywhere near Lahaina after 10. And there's the National Guard finally came, and they're at all of the intersections on the bypass and on the way in and out of Lahaina. They have it sort of taped off, the areas that you're not supposed to go in, but people have been sneaking in there anyway, because I've seen videos on YouTube of it. But I think that the people that didn't burn are still affected by the fact that their jobs are gone, So it's kind of a shit show for everybody.
Yeah. So you talked that you do grief counseling and you've had training for this. What do you do when in a situation like this? How do you help people?
Well, that's the dilemma because this isn't normal grief. This isn't a normal grief process. And I see it as a huge challenge because there's so many people that need help. So I called the Grief Recovery Institute, which is the people that certified me years ago, and said, can you recruit other people like me that are willing to do free, because everybody lost their insurance because their jobs burned or went away, to do free virtual therapy with these people as needed. So the gal from there is working on that. And then she was going to send some books, some grief books. And we were talking about, doing a training, a webinar training for teachers and people that work in the schools, and how to work with the kids. But we were talking about January. So while I was on vacation, I kept thinking about it, and I thought, that's too long. That's too late. This is more acute than that. And so I found a course online through Johns Hopkins that is psychological first aid for people that respond to disasters. So I took that course, and I decided that I'm going to go to Maui in a couple weeks and try to help do that aspect of it, and then talk with the person at the Department of Education about the webinars, and start setting up grief workshops so I can do groups of people. And I just need to recruit some volunteers to help me when I get over there. But it's going to be a huge process, and a lot of people, especially the Filipino community, do not believe in therapy for themselves or their kids. So that's a challenge right there. So I'll have to try to find some people in that community that can help convince people, especially, I'm really worried about the kids, especially, I will do 5 to 12-year-olds, and then 13 to 18-year-olds, and then do adult work too. It's going to be a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, the kids seem to be overlooked in this. I mean, it's got to be devastating for them.
Oh, it's horrible. It's terrible. Their lives are upended, and they don't understand it. My older grandson's best friend, he's a mess. But they called me last night, and I told them that I'm coming in a couple weeks, and I want to talk to him first. But he's got a little boy that's about to turn 4, and this little boy is having night terrors about fire. Mm-hmm. And kids that young, you really can't do therapy with them, and they don't really understand grief, or I'll talk to them and see if I can get them to draw me pictures and stuff like that. But that's so young, but that's needed too. But that's not in my wheelhouse. I don't do kids under 5.
It's going to be a long haul back. And in the midst of this too, you have your daughter there in Oceanside where you're at. How's she doing?
My daughter recently finished chemotherapy after a 3-year protocol, and she's doing pretty good. She's very sad because Maui was her happy place too. And she knows a lot of our friends that were affected. She was worried about her sister. She started a GoFundMe for her sister and her nephews. And that money will be used to help Bri hopefully move off island to get a new start someplace that's safer, and where she doesn't have to be traumatized every time she sees the West Side, But if that's happening to Bri, it's got to be happening to other people. So I think Kay's more worried about me and going over there, and worried about her sister and if she can get off that island.
Going over there to do this grief counseling, is it something you feel like you need to do, that it's a way of trying to give back and help?
I feel like I was, because of what I've gone through in my life, I've had a lot of loss. And so that's how I ended up doing grief work in the first place. I've done grief work for about 40 years. And I felt like I was called to do it. And, so after I talked to the gal at the Grief Recovery Institute about getting stuff organized for January, I'm on vacation and I can't sleep. And I'm thinking, okay, that's not going to work. That's too far away. I need to do something more immediate. And I said, the funny thing is, Matt will like this because it's a Lilydale story. My daughter got a reading at Lilydale And it was her first time there. She wasn't sure. And then my grandfather, so her great grandfather, who was from Hawaii, came to her during her reading and said, "Tell your mom that she needs to follow through and get over to Maui and do the work." So I don't have a choice. Got to do it.
Very quickly, what's Lilydale?
Lilydale is a spiritualist community in upstate or Western New York. It's about an hour from Buffalo, and it's been there for about 144 years. And spiritualists believe in God, but they also believe that your spirit lives on forever. And so during their summer camp, which is the middle of June till Labor Day, they have 45 registered mediums that do demonstrations and classes and healing and reading for people. So they contact people that have that are in spirit, and you have a conversation. It's pretty fantastic, but it's always interesting.
Yeah. Well, Shirley, our prayers, our thoughts for you and your family and everybody that has been impacted by this fire. And I hope that Lahaina will have an opportunity to come back sooner rather than later. But I think it's going to be a long haul. So
I do too.
Yeah.
If people that are seeing this want to help, I would say send gift cards, like gas cards and Lowe's and Home Depot and Target over there. There's the fella at he runs the Maui Ocean Center. His name is Tapani, and he has been helping route gift cards for people to the community. And he's completely above board and totally trustworthy. And I asked State Representative Ellie Cochran, I said, is there an organization we should trust besides, because I usually just donate to the Maui Food Bank and the Maui Humane Society. But my understanding is that they need stuff where people can go buy tools or, something to try to fix up their house or their temporary living situation. And she said, yeah, she said gift cards. And this guy at the Maui Ocean Center is the one to send them to.
All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you. And
thank you so much. And for the people who are going to go over there, let's show some grace to these people.
Exactly.
And patience, please.
And patience.
Patience and kindness. Yeah.
Yeah. Shirley, thanks so much.
Guys.
Take care of yourself.
Thanks, guys.
Okay.
You too. Take care. Bye-bye.